Hey, I'm Kevin and today we're making a bed
in the Kevbotworkshop. Welcome back to the Kevbotworkshop. As I start labeling and breaking down the wood for this project, let me talk about the design aspects for the bed. I got inspiration from Japanese design to come up with the look of this bed. The headboard and footboard are made up of these wider panels and these thicker legs and cross beams. I will connect these cross beams to the panels with these smaller maple pieces. For this project, I'm going to make a callback to my saddle bar stools where I use cherry wood and maple for a solid contrast. I'm using a majority of 8/4 stock and a little bit of 6/4. Rather than doing my typical joiner and planer to get my stock to the dimension I am looking for, I am using the bandsaw to take off some of the material. So besides joining and planing all the lumber, I glued up pieces of 6/4 to make stock for my legs and crossbars for the headboard and the footboard. So right now I'm gonna send everything back through the joiner and planer so that I can get all the stock down to its final dimensions, and then we can actually cut these things down and actually start on the joinery to get this bed together. To square up the legs, I first jointed one edge and then squared up the other. To keep them square, I rotated them every time I sent them through the planer. When these were all said and done, they are 2.5 by 2.5 inches. Typically on a project, I spend a lot of time on the plans and I follow them very closely. For this project, I'm doing it a little bit different. Because of the type of wood I can get and the thickness I can get, I've been kind of altering the plans as I go along to make sure that I can do as much as I can with what I have. For the panels on the footboard and the headboard, I knew I was going to want to book match these so that I can get this cool looking grain effect. I also wanted these panels to be about 1 inch thick for not only stability but also the look of the bed. I knew I was going to need thicker boards to do this. Typically you would use 10 to 12/4 boards so that you can cut them down the middle and still yield that 1 inch thickness. However, the lumber store I go to doesn't have boards that thick. The only thing they could offer was 8/4. Now this was a little more than 8/4, it was closer to maybe 9/4. But after it was planed and jointed, it actually brought it down and it's slightly less than 2 inches thick. So I'm not gonna be able to get that 1 inch thickness that I'm looking for. So I'm gonna alter my plan so that I can get these boards to about 3/4 of an inch. If they're a little thicker, that's great, but I don't wanna go anything thinner than that. What I'm worried about with these boards is that there's a lot of tension that builds up within wood. I could cut these open and there could be a lot of movement within the wood. These can cup, bow, twist, and move just because it's trying to release the tension. So right now I'm kind of crossing my fingers so that when I cut these boards open that there's nothing that goes wrong with them and that I can joint them and plane them and they can stay flat. So let's take these over to the bandsaw, hold our breath, and try to butterfly these stakes. I set up a feather board on my bandsaw to help cut straight down the middle. My bandsaw might not be finely tuned, or I may have been trying to force the board through because I did see the blade wander, so these boards will be about 3/4 when they are all said and done. I sent them through the planer one more time to get them ready for the glue up. To make sure they lined up correctly, I'm using dowels to join them together. The dowels are pretty tight, so the clamps will help pull them together. The maple I'm using is just some scraps from my pile, and I'm glad to see that it has some curl to it. Now that I have everything surfaced, I can start cutting it down to its final dimensions. For the panels, I used a feather board for extra stability against the fence. For the length, I just cut them to the dimension of a queen size mattress, which is 60 inches. At this time, I also cut the legs and the crossbars to their height. The leg height and the panel width all depended on my mattress thickness and how high I wanted it to be off the ground. If you want something higher, make them longer. If you want a shorter headboard, make them shorter. I use my crosscut sled for some reason, and as you can see, they are a bit large to be doing this. Whatever you use, please be careful making your cuts. The maple pieces measure in at 2 inch by 3 inch. For the joinery on this, I'm using dowels. The wood whisperer Mark Spagnolo made a bed with similar pieces and he used dominoes. If you are going to use dowels like this, make sure you secure the jig to the piece as tight as you can. Now I just have to line up where I want them to be laid out and drill the holes on the panels. To join the panels to the legs, I'm taking a page out of DK Builds' book and draw boring them to the legs. DK explains it well in his bed build video, so I'm going to leave a link to it in the description down below. Kinda like in my coffee table build, you make a tenon and you pull it into the mortise using a dowel and an offset hole. I used a router to remove most of the bulk and then cleaned up the shoulder with a chisel. The difference between this and my coffee table build is that I cut individual tenons on this so there can be seasonal movement. With a pull saw and a coping saw, I removed most of the waste and cleaned it up with a chisel. Before I marked for the mortises, I connected the panels together for the headboard. After I did a dry fitting, some of the dowels were impossible to remove because of the tight friction fit. So there is no glue in some of them, but I doubt they could ever come out because they are so tight. I have 1 inch here from the top that's just based on design, and so I want this top of the board to line up with this line here. This stuff down here, because we're going to lock down this pin, the rest of it is going to move this way and come back. So it's going to do this while this stays still. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a tenon so that this is nice and tight, but these just have a little more space so that they can go up and down and they can expand and contract during the seasons. Now that I laid them out, I can score the lines and remove the waste for the mortise. You can do this a number of ways, but I'm using my plunge router. I removed the waste as close to the line as I could and then chiseled the rest. From the back side of the leg, I drilled a hole for the dowel so that it can't be seen from the front. Now I can do a dry assembly so I can mark where to drill the holes for the tenons. I drilled the holes a 1/16 of an inch closer to the panel so that the dowel can pull in the tenon. Using a file, I elongated the holes to allow for movement. Before I did a final assembly, I gave everything a sanding and did some of the harder to reach finishing. I would have liked to finish the maple pieces separately, but since some of them got stuck, I just had to tediously get in between them. I first hit everything with some shellac to help with the blotchiness of the cherry, and then did my usual coat of armor seal for the top coat. Now I just need the dowels for assembly. I gave them all a taper so that it can guide through the holes better. Using 2 clamps to make a longer one, I pulled them together and drove in the top dowel. Since the top tenon does not move, you can use glue. For the rest of the tenons, you drive the dowel in most of the way and apply glue to the end so that the dowel is glued to the leg but does not glue to the tenon. And with a flush trim saw and a sander, you can sand the dowel flush. To attach the top, I need to find where to drill the holes for the dowels. To do this, I'm using dowel centers. This will leave a point where I need to drill. All there's left to do is to make the support for the mattress. Here I'm cutting down the sides to fit the mattress at 80 inches. To attach the sides to the headboard and the footboard, I am using knockdown hardware from Rockler. You have to inset these into the legs and the sides. I used a self-centering drill bit to start and drilled a pilot hole so I can use long screws for strength. You can see how these go together. So I have to cut a slot bigger so that it can be locked into place. This is where it hurts the most because I used pine 2x8s for the support. It felt wrong having pine touch this beautiful cherry wood, but it didn't make sense using something expensive if it was going to be covered up. I used 2x8s as slats because I did not want to make a center support, and these are holding up strong. The support is pretty self-explanatory. I attach these longer pieces to the side and then place the slats on top. I cut smaller pieces of pine to use as dividers so that the slats don't move around. With glue and brad nails, I secured them in place. I used a keycard to give just enough wiggle room so that the slats can go in and out. With the supports done, the last thing to do is the final finishing of anything that wasn't finished. Then the bed is done. I try to do one big project every year, and this year was a bed upgrade. I'm very happy with the result. The support is strong and I am seeing no sag from the slats, and I just love the design of the headboard and footboard. If you like this project and you want to see more like it, hit that like and subscribe button so you can see future videos when they come out. If you have a question, comment, or a suggestion of a project I should do in the future, leave it in the comment section down below. You can see other videos of mine right over here or on my channel. That's it for now. I'll see you guys next time in the Kevbotworkshop.